Okay.
Do you know if I'm having the shot right? Do you know if I'm in the shot right?
We are looking on our phones.
Come on.
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. The microphone. Oh, that's the microphone. Okay. Welcome back, everyone. We're going to make a start. Welcome back. Welcome to people watching at home for our final session of the day, where we're going to try and bring together some of the threads we've been talking about and to give you some hope without lying about the darkness. I think that's what our speakers are going to do. So we're talking about towards a globally just transition. We're going to talk about the scale of the crisis that we face, but also how unequal and unfair that crisis is, in that we are not all equally responsible for climate change. And we know that the vast bulk of carbon emissions have been created by the richer part of the richer world. So 100 corporations are responsible for 71% of global emissions today. 20 fossil fuel companies are responsible for more than 1/3 of all greenhouse gas emissions in the modern era, historically speaking, as well. And these aren't just fossil fuel companies, although of course they're responsible for an awful lot, but the arms industry, private equity, which invests in fossil fuels, the banks and so on, are really all part of fueling and exacerbating this crisis. So BlackRock, we've heard of BlackRock many times today. BlackRock, the biggest asset fund manager in the world, admit themselves by their own figures that in 2020 their investments contributed more carbon emissions than the entire UK economy in the same year, and that's likely to be a huge underestimate. Lockheed Martin, the arms giant, reported higher emissions than even some high-income countries like Denmark, New Zealand, and Slovakia, and certainly more than most developing countries. But we also know that the worst effects of this crisis are being felt in countries which contributed almost nothing to climate change. So at root, what we have here is a question of justice and a question of the global economy, which goes to the heart of everything that we do as an organization. So we want to thread all of this together and see where we go from here in this final session. And I'm really, really pleased that we've got three excellent panelists to help me do this. Farooq Tariq, who's the General Secretary of the Pakistan Kisan Rabita Committee, which is a member of La Via Campesina, which many of you will know is the international peasants movement that we've been working for many years. It includes millions and millions of people around the world on the front line of the fight against global agribusiness and for a better world. And we were really happy when we found out Farooq was in the country. We didn't originally know you were here, Farooq, and it was brilliant to find you were here. And we thought that people would really like to hear from him at this conference. So I'm delighted that you can be with us today, a day before you fly back to Pakistan. Unfortunately, Nick Min couldn't be with us today from Jubilee for Climate, or now the Jubilee Movement. So we've got Rob Callender, who hotfoot from playing the game with us down the corridor, is going to explain a bit about what his new movement is doing. And then we've got Maggie Mason, who you'll know from the first session, long-time Global Justice Now activist, and more recently, one of the foremost leaders of the fight against the Cumbria coal mine. And she'll tell us a little bit more about this. But first of all, I'm going to go to Farooq. I'm going to give Farooq a little bit longer than the other two speakers, as I thought he's going to try and weave together climate, food, and debt in the Pakistan and then global South context. Farooq, welcome, and yeah, you need to come up here, unfortunately, so that the people at home can see you. Thanks.
Well, good afternoon. This is first time I'm attending a meeting of Global Justice Now, and really fortunate enough to attend this whole day proceedings. Today is Eid in UK, and tomorrow it will be Eid in Pakistan. But many thousands of families will not be celebrating Eid because of the torrential rains, which has killed over 100 in last 3 days. And this is another unusual weather wave at present time. Now, normally we had four weathers, but now they are so much mixed with each other that we don't know when the summer would start and when it would end. It's a consistent heat waves which has started from March this year, which is normally not the time when the wave would start in Pakistan and India, and in North India particularly. But now situation is this, that the hottest day for last 61 years was at Jakbabad on 14th of May, when there was 51 degree Celsius. So you can see, in a country where there is a load shedding of electricity in most of the country for over half of the day. When I left Lahore almost 10 days earlier, it was bloody hot, humidity, then there was no electricity. Most of the UPS would not work according to the unscheduled cuts in power. And you could see when there's a 40 to 45 degree, even in Lahore, life became hell. So when I came here, I was bit relaxed that it's bit better weather, at least 2 weeks break from the heat wave in Pakistan. Now I'm going back to the same hell, but we are going to make that hell a heaven. So that's why I see this topic, hope in the dark, is exactly what we are doing in Pakistan at present time. Now I will speak mainly on some conditions of climate issues, and also on issue of depth, the present change in the government. Now you have also a change. I don't know if it would be better change. I think it is even worse. It could be even worse here. So is the case in most of the countries. So change doesn't come really for betterment at present time. We had a government of Imran Khan, the cricketer, the hero, and for 4 years he tried his best to please IMF and World Bank by paying more debt what what was paid earlier by the government. Even during the Corona period of 2020, and I spent almost 40 days in a room. I was one of the first victims because we were doing some distribution of rations. So I was first victim, and I could see even in that year, the Imran Khan government paid 25% more debt to IMF when they should have said, sorry, we can't pay. We don't have the money. We have to pay for the people. But they did what they did. They brought Hafiz Sheikh, one of the official of IMF, as finance minister, and one of the official of World Bank as the head of the State Bank of Pakistan. So the two main offices were occupied directly by those who were earlier employed by these institutions. And these were so-called experts, the technocrats, who would have some very miracle solution to the growing poverty and inequality which was prevailing during the last period. But what has happened, that they paid more money, and the result was we had during the corona 20 million new poor, which was never the case earlier. It was going like this. I have seen Lahore streets during corona period, where Lahore is the second largest city after Karachi, and I've seen Lahore where thousands were standing on the canal side. These were the daily workers who would go to sell some vegetables, some fruit. They will be daily wage workers. So Corona brought the lockdown brought such a situation that they had no savings to spend, and they have to be in the streets to ask people if they could afford. And there was tremendous sympathy wave and solidarity wave by ordinary people of Pakistan. And we see that that period was not because of the government policies that people did not die of hunger, but although hunger was seen almost every corner of Pakistan during those period. Now, for 4 years, they increased the price of electricity by almost three more times what was 4 years earlier. And this was conditionality of the IMF. You have to raise the prices of electricity, price of gas, price of oil, and withdraw the subsidies. You are spending too much on the people, they were saying. Now, this is very strange. Where public money should have been spent more. IMF has a strategy, cut those spendings and increase the prices of daily use of these gas, electricity, and oil, and so on, and then pay back to us, and so on. And it was $6 billion loan to Pakistan, and they paid maybe $9 billion already during this period. And then Imran Khan suddenly became anti-imperialism, and he suddenly became anti-America because he knew that he's going to lose a vote of no confidence in the parliament. So before he could lose the vote, he started saying that America has conspired to throw him out of power. And this was just a nonsense because he had lost the the parliamentarian base of his own party because he was so unpopular because of these policies. People hated the growing continuous price hike all the time, and that was we have seen that. And then he, what we were saying, look at Britain, there's more price hike. Look at US. So it's an international phenomena. Why you are crying? Why you are saying it's all over? True, it's all over, but you see the conditionalities of the working class and the working people in a country like Pakistan, where the minimum wage is less than $100 a month. So how could you put the prices at the same level as some of the other countries? And now you have seen the condition of Sri Lanka. I was very happy to see today the occupation of the presidential palace today by thousands and thousands of people of Sri Lanka. Hats off to the people of Sri Lanka who has done today, taken over the presidential palace and forced the most dictatorial president in the history of Sri Lanka, who was responsible for the killing of thousands of Tamil population in the past period. Now we are happy the people rebelled in Sri Lanka, and that's the only way forward for most of us during this time. But after 4 years, he lost the power. A new government came in, and the the civilian life of Pakistan is normally controlled by the military establishment. The two main expenditures of the annual budget is repayment of the foreign loan and the so-called defense. It's not really defense, it's the wastage of money on the arms and so on. And these two expenditures takes up almost 70% of the budget, of the annual budget in Pakistan. And military establishment was unhappy because Imran Khan at the last month tried to become an anti-imperialist, and he went to Russia and he tried to express his solidarity with Putin. And this is a nonsense that you are expressing solidarity with another dictator to oppose another imperialist country. So this was not on by us. We said this is just nonsense what he is doing. He actually, Imran Khan was the most idiot politician in the history of Pakistan. He was just a sportsman, and what he would only say, you are a thief, you are a thief, you have looted, it's all corruption, I am here to end the corruption. But now within 4 months of his losing of power, we have seen the level of corruption even in his period of 4 years. The way they even got money to transfer the bureaucrats from one post to another. there was a rates fixed, how much that post would earn in a special place where is mainly the revenue places and so on. So the new government has done more to please the IMF, not less than Imran Khan. So that's where we are standing at present time. We had no option of these rich capitalist politicians who has taken Pakistan backward, and they have spent most of the amount on non-development expenditures. Now, the condition at present time is less than 2% of the total budget in Pakistan is spent on education, less than 1% is spent on health. Now, we see incidents of polio in Pakistan, which is you don't see any other countries. So all these the policies of Pakistani rich politicians dictate pursuing the policies of IMF has made the lives of millions of Pakistani 220 million population hell, and we see that poverty is on ever growth in all parts of Pakistan. Now, in this background, we are there to do some campaigns. When we started our campaign on gas and oil, that this is a dirty energy, don't make electricity through gas and oil, make electricity through uh, uh, air, through uh, yeah, sun and so on. And I visited one uh, power plant which was producing electricity by coal. This was like 3 hours from Lahore. It's called Saiwal Coal Power Plant, sponsored by China. And China, during the last period, tried Pakistan as an experiment of this CPAC, this cooperation with China. BRA, the first experiment was done in Pakistan. There was a huge plan of building infrastructure, the main motorways, some of the underground railway lines, and some in Lahore, for instance. They had a 27-kilometer long this orange line, like you have a tube in London. Now, 280 billion rupees were spent to bring people for 27 kilometers, and the total budget of whole one province Balochistan was 320 billion. Now look at the priorities of the ruling classes. They want to spend on huge massive projects which they can show to the world we are also on the path of growth, but they don't see the real condition. Most of the roads in Pakistan are in absolute bad condition, and they spent 280 billion on 27-kilometer long orange line in Lahore. So is the case in some of the motorways. When 80 over 80% of roads needs repair, they are building motorways. And this is China. China is spending money in Pakistan to transport their product from China. There is a border from Gilgit Baltistan from China. There is a road called Sharai Karakram, and that roads go all the way to Gwadar on the Arabian Sea, and then they want to use that route to export their goods from China to all of the world, and this would reduce tremendously their cost. So it's the Chinese national interest which they were paying the amount to Pakistan, and they had a plan of spending like over $40 billion in Pakistan. They could spend like 20 billion, and there are some good main roads like the motorways and so on. But when people have no money to travel, and the petrol is almost £1 a liter in Pakistan, which was almost half a pound a liter only 4 months before. The present government, who has been close to China, they they have they have put more money, increasing the price of the oil during the last 4 months. So almost every week they are increasing the price of oil. And what they are saying, they want to avoid the condition of Sri Lanka. They don't want Pakistan to become another Sri Lanka. But the way they are behaving, they are on the same path which Rajpakse was in Sri Lanka during the past period. Now, what we see, well, we are doing campaigns against coal production, against gas and oil. There is also another misunderstanding. Using gas to produce electricity is very clean energy. Now, I have not spoken of reparation because this is just a new idea in Pakistan. No one talks about it. There is no debate in any of the media that Pakistan should get some reparation the way people have suffered, because Pakistan is the 10th most affected country by climate change. The 10 most countries who are affected by climate change, Pakistan is one of them. So Pakistan should be on the forefront of fighting for reparation, but these ruling classes are there only to please these multinational corporate sector, and they are implementing new liberal agenda, privatizing health facilities, privatizing education, privatizing most of the energy plants which they have built in the past. They want to raise some funds to pay back the loans. So here, our campaigns in depth. We have done some rallies, and we were the first one to organize a climate justice march in 2018. We went to different schools, and we said a young girl of Sweden can lead an international campaign. Why can't you young people come and demonstrate on the streets? So we had like 5,000 students from different schools. And these schools were mainly elite schools, private elite schools. And that's another interesting phenomena. The public sector colleges and universities, their students are just taking a back seat, but the radicalization among the students in the private sector is tremendous at present time. That's a very new thing which I was really surprised, and they came in the forefront because they are more on the net and they are reading many international things and so on. So they became active, and now every year we have climate justice marches in Lahore and other cities, and we are doing campaigns against production of electricity by gas and oil. So our group, which is Pakistan Kisan Rabta Committee, in association with several other social organizations, social movements, youth movements, and there is a new youth movement in Pakistan at present time, which is demanding restoration of students union, which was banned by military dictator in 1980 by General Ziaul Haq, still banned. So right of association is another place where our students are fighting. So we are building a new youth movement, and I was really pleased to see a new faces of Government College University today when there is a new leadership have come up. So we have organized students and helped students in Progressive Student Collective. So we have a feminist collective. We have a climate justice collective. We have it's called Hakook Khalq Party. It's called People's Rights Party. So we have different, and Aurat March. 8th March has become mobilization for many thousands of women in the last 4 years. Never ever we had so many women in the streets as has been the case last few years. That's a new hope, a new leadership of women coming in the forefront, and they don't keep themselves just on the rights of women. They raise issue of climate change, they raise issue of inequality, they uh, uh, raise issue of cancellation of debt. We are demanding that Pakistan should not pay any debt for at least 4 years. They should suspend paying anything and spend that money not on the military, not on other non-development expenditure. They should spend this money on the health, on the education, on climate area where they need more support, because glaciers are now we see the northern part of Pakistan is full of these. You see a lot of snowing in those areas, but now the glaciers are melting at a very fast speed. This year, it was even the farmers of northern area who complained that their uh, production of agriculture has been affected because of the earlier melting of the glaciers, and the land has been dried and they could not do anything. And also, because of the heat wave, we have a crisis of wheat at present time, crisis of food at present time. Our organization is fighting for food sovereignty and for land rights. These are the two main issues, areas we are fighting. Land rights, because there's a feudalism in Pakistan. Some people own thousands and thousands of acre of land, and there we are organizing the tenants, the small farmers, the rural poor, the communities, and those who are known as kammis. Kammis are like the low caste. So we are organizing them in the mainstream politics and so on. So the impact of climate change is great on the production of food in Pakistan at present time, and most of the food items have become very expensive. Even the wheat prices has gone up, rice prices has gone up. Kilo of rice was only 100 rupees. Now it's over 250 rupees a kilo, like a pound for 1 kilo of rice in Pakistan, where you see the wages are very low. So I just gave you some examples and some glimpse of the lives in Pakistan, but I just like to end on here. Global Justice Now is not your organization, it's our organization as well. We also need global justice in Pakistan, and we will do our best to coordinate and cooperate and do our work in solidarity with your work in Britain. And this is a hope for us in the dark. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Farouk. I know it's the first time you've spoken at one of our conferences. I hope it won't be the last time. And solidarity and good luck with your struggles. When I was talking to you in the break, we were both very inspired by the growth and energy and passion and anger of the youth movements in our country. And we were thinking about how we can do some work to connect them in the months and years ahead. So I hope we can do that. Thank you. Now, my very great pleasure to I'm sorry that my longtime friend Nick Amin is not able to be with us today, but he has a very able replacement in Rob Cullender, actor and activist, and you're going to tell us, Rob, about the Jubilee movement that you've been part of in the last couple of years.
Thanks. Yeah, I can't replace Nick Amin, but I can stand here. I think something that has been coming up a lot from the questions that I've heard is what can we do? There's a lot of dark in the Hope in the Dark. There's a lot of what should we do? What ought we to do? It's really interesting. The word should implies a debt. In German, the word Schulde means a debt. You have a debt to do a thing. That's what the conditional tense is. That's why they're called conditionalities when the IMF imposes them. What should you do? And I think also there's what are we not saying enough here? What should we say? What are we not speaking out loud? For all sorts of reasons, for all sorts of habits that have made us speak and think and behave in certain ways. And there are some things that haven't been said enough here, although they've been said once or twice. We're called the Jubilee Movement now. I'll talk about why in a moment. We're not to do with the Jubilee debt campaign, except the fact that Jubilee is a tradition that has gone back thousands of years that we've also adopted as something that can guide us. Jubilee is the tradition of debt cancellation, the restoration of equity by redividing lands and other measures. It's funny, this word debt, this word should, this word ought. Debt is everywhere. What do you think you should do? Everywhere we feel the sense of debt. And debt implies a sense of fairness or equity, a move away from somewhere that would be the right thing to do, a move away from a fair space. I think that's really important, because when we're talking about justice, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about fairness. What have we moved away from? What is there to repair? Where is the debt? And the debt is enormous. And the debt is in us, in this room right now, in this building, in the buildings behind us. When we heard Lumumba talk about 45 trillion, 777 trillion, bear in mind that those trillions are real. They have been realized in buildings, in structures, in architecture, in privilege. They can't just be easily repaired. And that's part of the problem. The wound is being kept open by the fact that we have to upkeep these structures with energy, with oil, with gas. So we're piling on debt on top of debt on top of debt. And something has come up. Maybe it was always coming up and it was foreseen a long time ago. But there's a climate and ecological catastrophe happening right now. And maybe that's the contradiction that will change capitalism, because it is a contradiction, because capitalism has created it. We don't speak about capitalism that often, loudly. Capitalism has created the climate and ecological emergency. It's also created a whole load of other catastrophes, existential catastrophes that people are feeling all of the time. So there's darkness everywhere. But the thing about climate change that's different is that climate change threatens the property of the bourgeois classes. And that means it's both an opportunity and something deeply, deeply worrying that we need to start talking about more loudly. The last time capitalism was in an obvious crisis, fascism was invented. Worse can be invented. There is more darkness. I want to say that very simply, while the debt exists, nothing we do will really change. And by the debt, I mean the debt system. And by the debt system, I mean the system of exploiting, of using inequality, of leveraging inequality to create more wealth. Used to be called usury, but now let's just call it debt. Because indebtedness can also be the lifeblood. It's the thanks, it's the gratitude, it's the feeling of indebtedness to each other. But we need to completely reevaluate where we feel our debts. Esther spoke about that as well. The indigenous connection, the connection to the land. We have a debt to nature that we never paid. When was the last time you paid the land in any way? Your debt to nature? We don't pay it. We've abstracted ourselves. We're above it. We've individualized ourselves. We're disconnected. While the debt exists, nothing will change. And you can see that in everything that's been said by all of the speakers before. How can you stop exploiting the resources of your land or exploiting yourself, the number of wage hours you can possibly give in a day, if you have a massive debt to pay at the end of the month or at the end of the year? How can you stop exploiting that? You can't. There's no way. If you've got a rainforest to burn to pay back a debt that's consuming 90% of your GDP, you'll burn it. If you have to plant a farm, an intensive farm, you'll do it. And as we've heard, the IMF will make sure that it's of a particularly disastrous kind. So while the debt exists, nothing will really change. Debt is the manifestation of inequality. It's also the architecture of it. It also sustains inequality. It makes sure that that keeps on going. And by inequality, I mean all of the injustices that come with inequality, all of the discrimination that come with those inequalities, because almost every single other catastrophe that we face, whether it's race discrimination, gender discrimination, comes with a debt. It comes with a wage gap. It comes with a wealth gap. While the debt exists, nothing will change. And by the debt system, I'm talking as a euphemism for capitalism. While capitalism exists, nothing will change. So let's say that now. And now I want to talk about hope in the dark. Because like a light that seems to be brighter when it gets darker, it's an illusion. The terrifying thing was that the light was always there, but that we've not been amplifying that we've been allowing the darkness to get darker and darker, and it could still get darker. And as one of the younger people in these rooms and on these panels today, that terrifies me. And the fact that we've failed again and again every day to amplify hope and to amplify the light that was already there, that never went out, is a failure, an absolute failure. And we have a debt to repay that. While the debt exists, it's one step forwards and two steps back. That's the problem. And so we started to think about what to do with Jubilee. 2 minutes. Jubilee, we used to be called Jubilee for Climate when we started. Climate was a lot of the movements that we came out of. We've been really energized by that. Lots and lots of different reasons. But we decided to drop for climate because for climate is just one of the existential but marginal threats that we've been pushed to. By marginal, I mean we've been pushed to the margins. The cost of living crisis is also another margin. And let's not call them crises. They are catastrophes. If you live them, they are a catastrophe, not a crisis. And I'm borrowing that from Cornel West, to credit him. We need to really understand these things in our bone. We need to use the language that is accurate with each other, with our family, with our friends. So we decided to rename as a Jubilee movement. And that's to do with something else as well, which is about how we create unity. One of our big pillars here in the Jubilee movement is first, absolutely, we need to call it out. We need to say, we need to cancel the debt. That's not enough. We need to abolish usury. That's not enough. What does that mean? That means a revolution against capitalism. That absolutely cannot mean reform, because reform means one step forward, two steps back. If you fight for a wage rise over there, that's fine, but where is it being taken from? Because it's being taken from somewhere. That's how capitalism works. So it's one step forward, two steps back, unless we unify. But what debt does, what this terror, this catastrophe, this darkness does, it makes us cling harder to our thing, our issue, our margin. So we need to actually relax our grasp to be able to have unity. We need to turn to each other. We need to turn outwards, away from the pain we feel, outwards to each other and start supporting each other. We need to have a superhuman, messianic amount of strength. And we need to do it again and again and again. Only that way will we stop invisibilizing, as Esther said, or sanitizing the movements and the beliefs of others, because our belief is louder. The climate movement often invisibilizes other movements because it's so loud, because it's so terrifying, because it threatens bourgeois property. And that's a real problem. The threat of ecofascism comes from there. Unity is massively important, and it's exactly how we build power. We had an indigenous friend visit us recently called Juan Pablo Gutierrez. He came from the Yucba people in Colombia. And he said back in the 1980s, the Colombian indigenous peoples were all fighting separately. They all had their own issues. One it was logging, one it was mining. They were all fighting against each other, and they all kind of didn't like each other. And that's just how it is. Lots of different indigenous peoples. They looked on the map, and there were loads of indigenous peoples. They decided to come together in a group called ONIC. They unionized. Now they're so powerful that if the Colombian government wants to do something and they know it's going to do anything to indigenous land, they have to ring up the indigenous people. And recently, all of the indigenous people were out there absolutely holding them to account. We need to create structures on levels that we haven't created for a very long time. We need to empower unions, and we need to empower each other. So what should you do? We need to start talking much more radically about these things, because that is our debt here in the global north, because the wealth is here in the global north. It has been taken here, and wealth is a share. If the wealth is here, it's not somewhere else. That's how it works. It's always been that way. That 77 trillion, that 777 trillion has been taken. It's here, not there. And while it's not there, it's a knee on the neck. It's the lack of funding in healthcare. It's the lack of funding in education. It's the fact that they have to exploit resources. We cannot get rid of climate change until we call out the debt system. That means capitalism. And what do you do with capitalism? That means revolution. And what do we have against us? Counter-revolution. Everywhere. There's that mollifying thing. There's the darkness, the creeping darkness that we have been losing against for decades. But the hope has always been there, and we need to really amplify that right now. I've got 30 seconds left, not even that. I'm stealing it from someone else. Remember that fascism was born out of capitalism in crisis. We can't deal with reformism. We need to build power. And building power is not a scary thing. Building power is about sharing power. It's about how we take that power into other systems. We take the power away. We turn outwards to each other, but not towards the establishment. We start building our own decision-making structures. We start creating a broad umbrella, a church. That's what we're trying to do in the Jubilee movement. We're not trying to say debt is the most important system, the most important thing, the most important issue. We're saying we want to be in communities everywhere. You're already doing things. Come and join in. Let's work together. Let's find ways in which we can do it. Because only when we intensify the struggle at every single one of our margins and get to the root of the thing, the same thing that's driving us to our margins, and we stop fighting each other because we're clinging to our margins, because we're so in such a catastrophe, only when we unify in that way will we do it. And that's absolutely what we need to do. And I know you all know that, but to go away and act on that is to really take that sense of debt into your bones. And that's the thing I feel I'm put here to do. You have to feel that, because if you don't amplify the dark, it gets darker and darker for the younger and younger people. The hope is in you. Please act.
Thanks very much, Rob. And now finally over to Maggie Mason, our chair for the day. But also, you know, a wonderful example, I think, Maggie, if you don't mind me saying, you've been a member of Global Justice Now and World Development Movement for decades now. And I'm just so impressed by the way that, you know, basically one of our groups decided that something was so important in the area that they were working on that they completely dedicated themselves to that activism, and it's become, you know, a really phenomenal source of inspiration for me. So thank you for all that you're doing, and I look forward to hearing more about it.
Thank you. Mind you, following the last talk is difficult, isn't it? Wow. Thank you so much for that. And I didn't mind you stealing a few of my minutes. I really didn't. Now, I think there's going to be a few slides for me somewhere. I think I'm not quite sure. Down there? It's just a few maps to show you something as we go along. Fine, that's great. We'll just leave it and I'll click it as we go. So I am going to, in the time that's left, try and focus on 4 things. First of all, I'm going to show you where the mine is and a little bit about that, because the more people who have a picture of that, the better. It's the Cumbria coal mine I'm talking about. Then I'm going to explain the current situation. And then I'm going to discuss our move from hope to better understanding of the dark, which I think fits very well with the last speaker. And I'm going to try and end on how we can empower ourselves. So that's the aim. I've got 8 minutes left, I think, for such a simple thing. Right. So this is a map of Cumbria, and the arrow there points you to a tiny headland next to Whitehaven, where an Australian coal mine company wants to build a new coal mine. My group is focused in Kendal. Down, can you see the little pointer? No, it does show. Yeah. So there we are down there. That's a 2-hour drive, whichever way you go around the mountains. So we are not a local group, but because we've grown out of Global Justice Now and we've got a constitution, we could start taking legal action, which most of the other sustainability groups in Cumbria couldn't do. So we were supporting those. So I used to be a minerals and waste planner in the team in the county council, which has tried to give permission to this mine. So I think I owe a debt as well, actually. I think a little bit of my pension probably comes from working on coal, but I thought I would, when I found how quickly things changed, in about 2010-12, when the current government came in, all the things that we thought were going to go towards sustainability suddenly switched off. And I confess I stayed there taking my salary, and I hoped eventually that I would learn enough to use against them, which in a rather wonderful way of serendipity I have. So the next one, this is just the detail showing you there'd be an underground mining area at the top, and then there'd be this awful rail loading facility in a nice valley. This is just flicking through these so you get a bit of idea. It's countryside at the moment. Whitehaven is to the north, and that's the application site. But the important thing is that most of the coal is actually under the Irish Sea. And you'll see the orange onshore mining area there. That will all be under the ground. And then that red dot is where there would actually be what I think of actually is the pit head, but it doesn't look like a traditional pit head. That is an artist's impression. These are huge grey domes that would be on top of the, on an old industrial site, actually. And again, very briefly, Cumbria County Council was the planning authority. Secretary of State for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, now Greg Clark, not Michael Gove anymore, which stopped Michael Gove giving us a decision on Thursday, which was quite amusing. So we are now waiting for a response, an answer on the 17th of August. And all the stuff offshore will actually by a different organisation, Marine Management Organisation, and they are really unaccountable. We'll have no chance of stopping them. And then there's the Coal Authority, which is quite interesting, and I might say more about that later. So I'm not going to flick through these, but we have started a protest. We've had a protest in Cumbria. This is one up in Carlisle, outside Cumbria County Council offices there. This was one outside Kendal County office with yours truly standing in the front. There's dead canaries lying around. That's the little symbol we tried to take forward. Though I have to confess, a couple of weeks ago when we were outside the Department of Levelling Up, most people thought we were chickens. Apparently people under 60 don't understand that canaries going into the mine was a warning against the miners dying from the gas. And when the canaries stopped singing, the miners had to get out quick. So we thought there was a clever sort of, the canaries, warning, dead canaries, all the rest of it. But we have to explain it, I'm afraid, to our younger friends. This is, again, old rebels wandering along outside Houses of Parliament, trying to get the point across. So I don't think there's any more. Well, I will just say one thing. One of the key issues about this, and the worst thing about any coal mine in 2022, you'd think, when the International Energy Agency say there shouldn't be any more coal mines because of climate change, you would think that the emissions from the use of the coal, everybody would understand, are the worst thing about a coal mine, particularly in the UK, where we do have some regulations still over dust and all the rest of it. But of course, no fossil fuel company wants to take any responsibility for these emissions. Scope 3 downstream emissions, nothing to do with us. It's like the tobacco playbook. Oh yeah, we've got lovely clean factories where we make cigarettes. It's not our fault if anybody smokes them. And this is what they said in effect. And the same people are involved now in trying to get this idea embedded all around the world and in our government. And that's why, although this is really, it's not a Adani, it's not a huge mine, it's quite remote. But this principle was really, really important and embedded in this, which is why our small charity has had immense support from a lot of people, including climate lawyers who are trying to fight these kind of climate legislation. So we've got a great legal team who, I knew enough from working in the coal in the West in County Council about minerals and waste planning that as soon as I got involved, I needed a barrister, because they're the ones who really know these things. And so we put a bit of money together to pay for a barrister, and they've been with us. Wonderful Estelle de Haan's been with us all the way through. Same person who does most of the airports challenges and is also working now on the Aberpagoom judicial review to do with the Aberpagoom coal mine in Wales, which Coal Action Network, good friends of ours, are working on. So this was a really key issue. And interestingly, somebody else in the county council, it really wasn't me, I think it was a boss that I had, and he'd retired before me. And he managed to get this in, that this legal scoping opinion would actually need to be assessed. And it would be on the scales, it would be a harm of the mine. And he was able to do that because of environmental impact assessment rules. But of course, the coal company have fought that every inch of the way. And sadly, I am fairly sure now that the government is going to be on their side. There's been a number of court cases to try to say whether or not this could be done. And well, I'll come back to why I'm not terribly hopeful about things. So anyway, they tried to get away with it with this thing, which is called the substitution myth. This is also a global defense for all fossil fuel companies. They say that, well, we'll have a new coal mine, but it would replace the equivalent volume of coal that is used, which is currently being imported from somewhere else. In effect, you open a new coal mine and they pretend another one will close. Same about oil, gas, all the rest of it. And so they say the coal isn't additional, so there aren't any additional global gas emissions. And we had absolutely top rate economics professors and evidence at our public inquiry, both from us and from our partners, Friends of the Earth, who came on board and have been absolutely fantastic. But again, we're waiting to hear whether our arguments are listened to, because this stuff is all over the news. Every time you hear the politicians from Cumbria up at Whitehaven, you'll hear Mike Starkey, the mayor, you'll hear, what is his name? Mark Jenkinson, who's actually a net zero watch type MP. And you'll hear Trudy Harrison. And they will stand up and they will say that this mine would actually reduce global emissions because it imports coal. Now, our wonderful friend, Professor Rebecca Willis, you may have heard of her from Lancaster University, she wrote a great article, a Guardian long read, called Dig Coal to Save the Climate, explaining the folly and the ridiculousness of this position. But you will hear even, the Conservative Environment Network MPs coming out and very piously saying, well, we really need to allow this mine because, it will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, the fact that it will run till end of 2049, when the mine that might currently producing that coal might close down before that, therefore you've got extra years of, they completely misunderstand. The fact that actually all this coal is supposedly destined for export, and the coal mine company had said that from the start. 13% of the coal was going to be used in the UK because it's actually a highly sulfurous mine, which was closed down before Maggie Thatcher started closing coal mines. It was already destined for closing down before the miners' strike because it was uneconomic. British Steel didn't want it. It was very high sulfur coal. So we found lies and lies and lies being told in the public sphere. The evidence at the public inquiry was better. So this was the UK legal. I'll leave that for a minute. So the evidence at the public inquiry seemed to be better. We felt we'd made a point. We were hopeful then as well. When we were hopeful in the beginning, because it was a rubbish planning application. And I speak as a nerd on planning applications for minerals and waste developments. It was a rubbish planning application. They obviously knew that the councillors in Cumbria County Council wanted to happen. And they used to then press down hard on us as planners to give us the answer, to justify the answer they wanted. It was a rubbish planning application. It was a rubbish planning officer's report. But as soon as we started putting better evidence in there, they really ramped up. This is a shapeshifter planning application, which has changed, and they've thrown more money at proving their case all the way through. Now, by the public inquiry, we thought this was actually exposing how awful they were. So, for example, they produced a report. The mining company, they paid for Wood Mackenzie, big global commodities firm, to put together a report which said that, which argued, well, coal mining is not going to, coal use isn't going to reduce at all. Even coking coal for steel, it's not going to reduce before 2050. Well, maybe by about 6%. We questioned and read through the detail, and they were gambling on the EU and the UK failing to keep to their legally binding targets. They were gambling on that, and on that basis, they put forward this report. So we exposed that. We exposed lots of things, all before the planning inspectors, and the report was written and ended up with the Secretary of State, then Michael Gove, on the 7th of April, and he was going to make his decision by the 7th of September. So I was not, but by then we'd had all these articles in the press with Conservative MPs saying things that weren't true. We'd had them speaking on BBC News and not being contradicted. Anytime we wanted to speak as a kind of people's group, they said, oh, well, you'll have to go to Whitehaven to speak because we'll treat you as a local group. Well, that's a 2-hour drive from Kendal. And I have actually moved to Bristol, to be honest. So that would be a very long drive for me. But they wouldn't do, we were finding that our words were hard to get across. But I said a lie can be easily said in a minute and a half, which is all they give you. The detail of why that's not true can't be told in 1.5 minutes. And it was just impossible. So we were not hopeful of Gove's decision. And in the meantime, the UK legal system had actually gone through several cases. They came out of Sarah Finch challenged an oil well in Surrey. And at the High Court, Justice Holgate said that they couldn't be an indirect impact of the oil well or any other fossil fuel extraction. And so they shouldn't be included in the EI. And immediately, if you can't include the worst harm of a coal mine in 2022, faced with a climate catastrophe and an ecological catastrophe, you know, you're just treating it, well, in my terms as a minerals planner, you're treating it like a limestone quarry. It's no different. All they do is measure or pretend to measure the operational emissions. And then they do a bit of a greenwash campaign and a bit of offsetting and a bit of this, that, and the other to argue that that's going to be nothing. And then, as I say, they argue, well, it's going to replace imports they reckon they're going to get a saving of 98,000 tons of carbon equivalent a year from not importing this coal from the US. But the emissions from the use of the coal in making steel are 8.8 million tons. And we had top experts from the IPCC, from various committees, all giving this evidence. But I have a horrible fear that it is going nowhere. And this is where things get very dark. We're now on the point where our politicians are openly questioning and trying to challenge and make us drop our net zero. Suella Braverman and supported by Steve Baker of Net Zero Watch, emphasizing again that really the only thing they want to do is minimize government. Boris Johnson, when he said he wanted to be in by 2030, what's your great post-Brexit aim? And well, we're going to minimize government. Jacob Rees-Mogg, you know, yes, I'm hoping Boris is going to be in there for another 20 years. They have no project but to minimize government, which means minimizing regulations, which means stopping us fighting climate change. So what I want to move on to is, having gone through that and beginning to understand the dark, and this runs through their approach to Cambo, their approach to all the North Sea oil and gas coal licenses, because again, they say they're going to halve emissions from those developments by 2030, but that is only the operational emissions. No scope 3 downstream. They are lying to us. They are definitely the worst climate hypocrites, I think, probably. And this is where GJN comes in, doesn't it? Because we do sometimes say, don't we, that our main aim is to stop the UK doing massive damage around the rest of the world. And we are exporting these terrible ideas. I mean, there's so many parallels with what Farouk said, you know, we've got rich capitalist politicians, you know, hello, Rishi Sunak. But I want to go on to the hope, because I was thinking about this. And when I saw the hope in the dark, I don't know about you, but my mental picture was of maybe a black box with a candle in it. And then I thought, well, actually, that's not it. The hope is that image of another world is possible. The hope is the stuff that Esther was saying. And the dark is like a box that is getting in the way of us reaching the hope that we want. And that way I feel better than thinking about it. It's about changing your paradigm. There is a hope out there, and we've had a wonderful experience meeting other people who care about this. You know, we spent £200,000 on the public inquiry. That came from funders and from other people. It may still not work, but we have so many contacts. The steel industry people are behind us. The steel industry unions are behind us. They know that we need to find a different way to decarbonize our economy quickly. And all the just transition work in this case is not actually up in Cumbria. It's needed in Port Talbot and Scunthorpe, where the steelworkers are, whereas that needs to change. So I feel that if we look at this hope on the horizon and the repair, the regreening, and we have to look inside ourselves, I think, to do the same kind of change, maybe the rematriation that Esther was talking about. And the XR as well say about that, you know, regenerate, repair, reconnect. And in that work, we will be doing the best that we can. And I do think that if we may not really think there's hope in some ways, but if we act as if we had hope, then there's an awful lot more hope than if we give up. And with that, I'll say thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Maggie. And I thought you were going to tell the story, actually, so I'm going to tell it for you, that you got into this work because we did a tour as WDM once, where we brought an activist from El Salvador, and you hosted them, and did a meeting, and they explained the importance of climate justice and climate change, and it just got you thinking in a different way, and it sent you on this trajectory. And that gives me real hope that what we do is important and creates change and creates all sorts of things. You can't even imagine basically where it's going to go. So thank you for giving me that hope. We've gone from the global south to the global north, and we've gone from the local to the global, and we've gone from the young to the not so young, and that's what our movement does. So, and young, very young at heart. So I want to thank you for that. Now, first thing I'm going to do is close down the live stream. Bye-bye live stream. Thank you for being with us, and I hope to see you in real life soon, but there's no point you staying if we're going to go to the audience. I'll go to the live stream, I'll come down here. We've got to finish fairly quickly. I know some